The general's red paludamentum smells like my father, Tribune. Why would he leave his honor on the shoulders of a condemned Celt? The courier boy, Lucius, wiped frost from his nose, pointing toward the makeshift cross where the woman, bound but not executed, shivered. General Marcus Aelius was already 40 paces distant, his back rigid steel against the biting Galician wind. The act defied every military law. Execution awaited traitors. Mercy awaited only the gods. A cold dread settled over the tribune Severus. If Aelius spared this woman, he risked the fury of Rome itself. General Marcus Aelius did not look back. He marched toward the portable praetorium tent, the heavy, metallic clang of his hobnailed caligae, the only sound louder than the whistle of the wind through the pines. He was Rome in this gods-forsaken corner of Hispania, unyielding, efficient, and cold. For 6 years, the general had prosecuted the Galician campaign with ruthless precision, earning the grim moniker Ferrum the Iron. His daily routine was a clockwork liturgy of discipline. 0400 hours, cold water on the face. 0430, reading reports by oil lamp. 0500, addressing the cohorts. There was no space for variation, no room for error, especially not after what happened at the Teutoburg forest. Inside the tent, the air was thick with the scent of old leather and sweat. His staff waited silent, already anticipating the general's first order. Aelius moved past them, stripping off his armor piece by piece, dropping the metal onto the wooden floor with deafening crashes. Each piece shed revealed the thin, scarred muscle beneath, testament to 30 years of faithful service. He was an arch-traditionalist, a man who believed the Republic, even the warped version under the current emperor, was built on the absolute adherence to duty. Law above feeling. Rome above blood. Yet standing now bare-chested before the basin, Aelius saw not the reflection of the victorious general, but the ghost of his son, Lucius. Lucius, who had been an ensign, eager and foolish, lost during a routine patrol in the Rhine Valley 3 years prior. The official report stated misadventure. Aelius knew the truth. His son had disobeyed a direct order, chasing glory where duty demanded caution. He had died without honor, and Aelius, the unbending father, had been unable to save him or even weep for him publicly. He had signed the death notice himself, without comment. This internal, festering wound was the only thing that could make him falter. He washed the dust of the execution ground from his hands, feeling the phantom weight of the paludamentum he had just discarded. It was a weight of a promise, a burden of pity he had sworn never to carry again. Why had he left the cloak on the condemned woman? Because her eyes, clear, defiant, and filled with a sorrow that mirrored his own, had reminded him too vividly of the last time he'd seen his son, pleading for a second chance he hadn't given. "The prisoner, General?" asked Tribunus Severus, stepping forward, his voice tight. Aelius dried his hands slowly. "She is condemned. The law has spoken," Aelius stated, his voice flat, emotionless. But the law also demanded execution, which he had suspended. Severus knew the unspoken command. The woman was to suffer the cold, suffer fear, but not yet die. She was a political lever, the captured daughter of the Galician chieftain Bricius. The execution was meant to crush Bricius's rebellion. The delay meant Aelius was playing a private, dangerous game. Send a patrol to the northern foothills, confirm Bricius's movements, and ensure the executioner understands his orders. "Wait," Aelius commanded, his eyes focusing on the map spread out on the table. The map was the only thing Aelius trusted. Cold lines, measurable terrain, predictable enemies. The unpredictability of the human heart, however, was his ruin. He took a sip of cheap wine, tasting the bitterness of a man who commanded legions, but could not command his own grief. The fate of Rome, the honor of the Senate, the peace of Hispania, all rested on his shoulders, and one single, impulsive act of mercy threatened to shatter it all. He had to know why. Why did her eyes hold such profound, familiar grief? The woman's name was Livia, not her original Galician name, which was whispered only in the shadows of the mountains, but the name given to her during her brief, brutal captivity. Livia was a captive, yes, but currently she was merely a fixture of the camp. A servant scrubbing floors in the praetorium annex, preparing water for the general's bath, tending the miserable vegetable patch near the fortifications. She was entirely unremarkable, clothed in rough tunic cloth, her wrists bearing the faint scars of earlier chains. Her face was perpetually masked by soot and fatigue. Livia was exhausted not just by labor, but by the relentless, grinding fear of the unknown execution. She had been brought down from the mountains 2 weeks ago, captured after a skirmish that cost the lives of 2 Roman centurions and 12 of her own people. She was the daughter of the chieftain, Bricius, and therefore a prize. She had expected a quick, sharp death. Instead, she received the cold, confusing gaze of General Aelius and the inexplicable warmth of his discarded cloak. Her small source of strength lay hidden beneath the floorboards of the annex barracks where she slept, a small, crudely carved wooden bird. It was the only thing she had left of her younger brother, Calen. Calen was perhaps 7 years old, living hidden in the caves. Livia's protection of the boy was the sole engine driving her to survive the Roman efficiency. If she died, Calen would be entirely alone. Her daily duty brought her into the heart of Roman power, close to Aelius's staff. Today, she was replacing the general's water flasks. As she moved silently, a shadow within the shadows, she heard the low, urgent conversation between Tribune Severus and the quartermaster, Lucius Cotta, near the map table. They spoke in clipped Latin, focused on logistics and movement. "The rations must be diverted by the third watch," Cotta muttered, tracing a line on the parchment map. "Aelius wants the 10th cohort shifted north away from the coastal road." Severus sighed. "A heavy deployment for mere scouting. Cotta, if Bricius hasn't moved yet, we are exposing our flank to the south near the old silver mines." Livia froze, her hand hovering near the brass ewer. The word south and silver mines struck her. She knew that terrain. The old mines were not near the southern flank. They were nestled deep in the central valley, a place Bricius used as a secret, temporary armory. If the 10th cohort was diverted away from the coastal road, it meant they would be marching directly toward the armory, not scouting. The map, she realized, was being deliberately misinterpreted by the general. Or perhaps he was moving his troops to protect something he knew was there. But why would the general hide an impending attack route from his own tribune? Livia continued her task, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was only a servant, a condemned woman, but she knew the Galician land better than any Roman surveyor. This troop movement was not defense. It was a trap, or the setup for one, aimed not at the roaming chieftain Bricius, but at something far more vital he was protecting. She knew of something the Romans were not supposed to know existed, and the general knew she knew. "Where are you watching from today?" The general and Livia's worlds briefly merged in the small, sterile space of the map room. Aelius entered, demanding absolute silence, the weight of the empire seemingly pressing down on his shoulders. Livia was ostensibly scrubbing the spilled ink from the wooden floor near the general's heavy campaign chair. Her posture was subservient, her eyes fixed on the dirty wood, but her senses were entirely focused on the man above her. Aelius moved with the practiced economy of a warrior. He had slept barely 3 hours, and the lines around his mouth were deep, carved by lack of sleep and relentless responsibility. He was studying the map, his long fingers tracing the lines Cotta had indicated earlier. Livia, pretending to polish the chair leg, was close enough to smell the bronze polish on his armor and the faint, lingering scent of the Galician pines that clung to his remaining cloak, the inner woolen one. He was focused on the coastal road. He tapped the area near Aqua Dulce. "The supplies will be delayed there. Inform the cavalry detachment to hold position for 12 hours. Livia understood the topography instantly. Aqua Dulce was a wide, exposed plain. Holding position there for 12 hours meant exposing the supplies to a full day of daylight travel, perfect for an ambush if Bricius was monitoring the coastal roads, which he certainly was. This wasn't caution, it was calculated vulnerability. It felt like bait. Aelius suddenly lowered himself into the chair, the leather creaking slightly. He didn't look at Livia, but his gaze settled on the floor directly beside her, a space of empty wood where she had just finished cleaning. For a long moment, the only sound was the scratching of the general's stylus on a wax tablet. Livia continued her scrubbing, maintaining the rhythmic motion of a person preoccupied with a mundane task. She felt the heavy, silent scrutiny of the powerful man, not directed at her person, but at the sheer fact of her presence, a reminder of the humanity he had suspended. He broke the silence, his voice rough. "You clean well, girl. Better than the last." Livia flinched internally but did not raise her gaze. "I endeavor to serve the camp well, General," she murmured, her Latin practiced and devoid of accent, taught to her by a captured Roman priest years ago. Aelius stopped writing. "Serve well? You serve Rome, Livia. You are still the daughter of Bricus. I am a captive, General. My loyalties are irrelevant when my life is forfeit." This was the line, the precipice where her two lives met. Her words were technically correct, a shield of forced humility, but Aelius knew she was lying. Her eyes, when he'd faced her at the cross, held the steel of someone who would never surrender her loyalty, even at the cost of her life. He watched her hand as it moved the rag, noticing a slight tremor. He knew she had overheard the logistics discussion. He knew the coastal road was bait, and he was betting she knew why it was bait. Aelius simply signed the order and stood up. "Continue your duties." He didn't dismiss her, didn't threaten her, only left the tense, quiet implication hanging in the air. Something dangerous had passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of shared, hidden knowledge. Livia knew she had been tested, and she had passed. But the true danger was just beginning. Something was about to spiral entirely out of control. The next morning the camp was unusually loud, vibrating with the organized chaos of troop deployment. The 10th cohort was mobilizing, preparing for their deceptive march toward the north, away from the true target. Livia, while fetching water near the general's supply depot, noticed the discrepancy that solidified her fear. Every Roman patrol leaving the camp carried sufficient rations for the expected duration of their mission, 3 days in this case. They also always carried the standard-issue heavy woolen blankets, even in the cool Galician summer. Today, however, Livia saw Centurion Maximus overseeing the loading of the supply mules for the 10th. Maximus was a renowned stickler for protocol, a man who measured every ounce of grain. But the mules were overloaded with something unexpected, an excessive number of specialized medical supplies. Not standard battle bandages, but expensive, complex salves, rare herbs, and several chests clearly marked with the symbols for high-grade pain suppressants, and surgical implements usually reserved for the Praetorium's head surgeon. Furthermore, there were far too many fresh water skins for a 3-day march through the well-watered northern foothills. Livia knew the Galician terrain. If the 10th cohort truly marched north, they would be moving across small streams and rivers daily. They would not need to haul so much water. But if they were heading south toward the dry, cracked valley of the silver mines, where the ground was arid and the only water source was often contaminated, that excess water would be critical for survival. The medical supplies, too, spoke volumes. Bricus's temporary armory wasn't defended by men, it was protected by the natural hazards of the old mine system. Unstable shafts, pockets of toxic air, and narrow, claustrophobic spaces where injuries were inevitable, even without combat. The Romans were preparing not for a battle against a chieftain, but for a highly risky, intricate subterranean operation. Livia felt a cold wave of realization wash over her. Aelius wasn't trying to capture Bricus with the 10th cohort. He was trying to neutralize the armory, a crucial blow that would cripple the entire rebellion, and he knew the cost in Roman lives would be high, hence the surgical gear. She clutched the water ewer, her knuckles white. She was the only one who understood the true intention of the general's movement, the only one who could read the silent language of the land and the supplies. The tribune, the quartermaster, they were all blinded by Aelius's reputation for tactical brilliance. They saw only the feint, not the real deadly strike. Livia had a choice: say nothing and survive another day under the shadow of the cross, or speak and risk certain immediate execution for interfering in Roman military strategy. She was a captive, sworn to protect her people, but speaking would mean protecting the Roman soldiers who were marching to inevitable injury or death in the toxic mines, and exposing her own family's vital secret. The weight of her brother Caelin's safety pressed down on her. Could she sacrifice hundreds of enemy lives for the life of one small boy? The doubt consumed her, turning her fear into a paralyzing moral conflict. She still did not act, but the knowledge now burned like a fever in her chest. The moment of decision arrived violently. Livia was tasked with preparing the small evening meal for General Alias in his private quarters. She moved like a phantom, placing the bread and cold meat on the folding campaign table. Outside, the final elements of the 10th cohort were marching out, their hobnailed boots drumming a slow, irreversible rhythm on the packed earth. Alias sat at the table, reviewing the last of the dispatches by the flickering lamplight. He seemed utterly remote, a statue of command. Livia realized there was no time for subtle hints or oblique warnings. The deception was complete. Within hours, the 10th would be deep inside the deadly, unstable valley. She placed the wine cup down, her hand shaking slightly. The general noticed the tremor, but dismissed it as the nervousness of a slave. Livia took a breath that felt impossibly heavy in her chest. "General," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the silence like splintering glass. Alias paused, his stylus hovering over the wax. He did not look up. "Speak your request, Livia." "The 10th cohort," she began, dropping the servant facade, her Galician resolve returning. "They march north, but their supplies are for the south. Too much water, too many surgical kits for the foothills, General. You send them to the Silver Valley, not to Bricius." Alias slowly lowered the stylus. The silence that followed was absolute cold, and more terrifying than any shout. Livia felt the immediate, crushing consequence of her act. She had exposed his most guarded secret, the precise location of the counter-strike. She had risked the entire campaign, and her life, for a principle she was not even sure she believed in, warning the enemy of her own people. Finally, Alias raised his head. His eyes were like polished flint. "You accuse your general of military deception, captive. You dare to read the signs of the camp." "I read the land, General," Livia countered, standing firm despite the panic gripping her throat. "The Silver Valley is not merely an armory. 3 deep shafts near the Fonza Rida collapsed last spring. They released the black miasma, air that burns the lungs. Your men, even the most disciplined, will be crippled before they reach the main cache. They carry no protective linen." Alias stood up, knocking his chair back onto the stone floor. It was the first sign of emotional break Livia had ever witnessed. "How do you know this?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Livia knew she had to offer a truth that was terrible but undeniable. "It is where my family hid during the winter of the famine. We learned the dangers to survive." "It is not an enemy trap, General. It is the earth itself." The air crackled with the sheer weight of Alias's fury, yet beneath the rage, Livia detected a flicker of calculation. He did not dismiss her instantly. He knew the Galicians understood their terrain perfectly. If her warning was true, the 10th cohort was marching toward mass fatality, a disaster that would shatter his command and shame Rome. "Guard!" Alias roared. The Tribune Severus burst through the tent flap, sword half drawn. "Confine this woman. No water, no food. If her information is false, she faces immediate, unrecorded execution, if it is true." Alias trailed off, looking at the map, seeing the lines of his planned attack now tainted with toxic gas. The history of the campaign and Livia's life had just irrevocably changed course. General Alias stood alone in the dim light of the Praetorium, the silence deafening after Livia's sudden confinement. He stared at the map, his mind racing through 2 decades of military training, trying to reconcile the meticulously planned assault with the terrifying intelligence delivered by a condemned captive. He was Ferrum, the Iron General, incapable of making sentimental decisions. But Livia's description of the Black Miasma had carried the cold ring of truth. He knew the region was volcanically active, and the old Roman mining records, which he had suppressed from his staff to maintain the secrecy of the operation, hinted at gas pockets. He had dismissed them as old wives' tales, prioritizing the tactical advantage. If Livia was correct, he had just condemned 900 men to a slow, agonizing death by poison, not by battle. This was not war. It was senseless murder based on his own arrogance. Alias summoned his lead surveyor, Decimus, a nervous, precise man obsessed with gradients and rock formations. Decimus arrived, shivering slightly in Aelius's intense gaze. "The Silver Valley," Aelius commanded, pointing to the spot Livia had described, Fons Arida. "Recent seismic activity. Are the old shafts stable?" Decimus stammered, pulling out his clay tablets. "General, the official geological assessment is stable. But there were local reports shortly before our arrival of a minor quake. We dismissed them as peasant superstition, sir. No formal investigation." "No formal investigation," Aelius repeated, the words acid on his tongue. He gripped the edge of the map table until the wood creaked. Livia had known more about the ground beneath his legion's feet than his entire engineering corps. He had to recall the 10th cohort, but if he pulled them back now, he would expose the truth of his deception to the Tribune Severus and the entire camp. His authority would be questioned. His honor, already fragile from the loss of his son, would be ruined, and the entire Galician campaign would descend into chaos. "Tribune Severus," Aelius barked, stepping toward the tent entrance. "Dispatch the fastest cavalry detachment, light armor only. Their mission: they are to intersect the 10th cohort's flank route, the one near the ancient ruins of Castra Luna." Severus looked confused. "But General, Castra Luna is miles off their planned route, near the coast. Are we diverting their scouting mission?" "No," Aelius stated, his voice absolute. "Tell the commander, Centurion Cassius, he is to deliver a direct verbal order. The 10th cohort is to halt immediately, establish a fortified camp, and wait for new orders. If they resist, he is to show the signet ring. No explanation is necessary. Move, Severus. Now." Severus snapped a salute and sprinted out. Aelius was now fully committed to the path Livia had opened. He was sacrificing tactical speed and risking mutiny by halting the attack just hours before execution, all based on the word of a rebel captive. But the greater risk was the internal one. If he let the 10th die, his command would be secure. But his soul, already fractured by Lucius's death, would be permanently lost. He had to save them even if it cost him everything. The urgency was absolute. The fate of the men, and his last shred of human morality, hung on the speed of the cavalry. Dawn broke with a tense, oppressive silence over the Roman camp. The cavalry messengers had returned, confirming the successful halting of the 10th cohort just miles from the Toxic Valley entrance. Aelius ordered Livia, brought from her solitary confinement, directly to his tent. The air was thick with unspoken accusation and volatile expectation. Tribune Severus stood stiffly nearby, his face a mask of suspicion, sensing the political earthquake that was about to hit. Livia was exhausted, but carried herself with defiant dignity, refusing to meet Aelius's eye. The general sat behind his table, no longer the detached commander, but a man wrestling with the monstrous demands of imperial law and human life. "Livia," Aelius began, his voice gravelly, "the 10th cohort is halted. Your information concerning the instability of the Silver Valley appears accurate." Livia finally looked up, her expression neither triumphant nor relieved, but grim. "They would be lost, General. All of them. The miasma is indiscriminate." Aelius leaned forward, driving his gaze into hers. "Why did you tell me? You are the daughter of Briccius. Saving the lives of 900 Roman soldiers gains you nothing. It weakens your own people. It certainly does not save your life." Severus interjected quickly. "She lies, General. She seeks clemency, or perhaps she is setting a deeper trap." Livia ignored Severus and fixed her gaze on Aelius. "My brother, Calen. He is 7 years old. He is hiding in a cluster of shepherd caves far from the battle. He knows nothing of war, but Briccius, my father, uses the old paths in the valley to move essential supplies to the shepherd villages, away from the army." Aelius waited, the implication hanging heavy. "If the 10th cohort had perished from the miasma," Livia continued, her voice fracturing slightly, "Briccius would have believed it a sign from the gods or a trick of the earth. He would have secured the mines and increased his operations, forcing the skirmishes closer to those caves. He would risk everything to keep his logistical chain open. To save his people, he would inadvertently expose my brother to the next wave of conflict." Aelius understood instantly. Livia's courage was rooted not in saving Romans, but in stopping the escalating brutality of the war that was closing in on the innocent. She wasn't seeking clemency. She was seeking a temporary suspension of violence that might spare her brother. She was sacrificing her people's strategic advantage for the life of one small boy, a profound conflict of duty that mirrored his own loss of Lucius. "You traded the strategic advantage of the rebellion for the potential safety of a child," Aelius stated, his voice hushed with realization. "You believe my intervention in the mines might slow the violence around Calen." "I believe you are ferrum, General," Livia said, a terrible dignity in her bearing. "You are predictable. You adhere to duty. If you attack cleanly. My father is desperate, he is reckless. The reckless put children in danger." Aelius stood up, circling the table. He saw the truth laid bare. Livia was no traitor. She was a desperate sister. And in her choice he saw the horrifying clarity of his own past failure. He had been so focused on Rome's rigid duty that he had ignored the human element, the children caught in the crushing gears of empire. He had done the same to Lucius, insisting on duty over compassion. The lie of his perfect control fell away. He had almost killed 900 men because of blind tradition. "Tribune Severus," Aelius said, his command returning, but now laced with a new kind of authority. "Cancel all execution orders for Livia. She is now under my direct, personal protection. You will treat her as an interpreter, essential to the security of the legion. If a single hair on her head is harmed, I will hold you personally responsible." The consequences of Livia's intervention rippled through the camp immediately, severing old loyalties and forcing painful exposures. General Aelius's decision to halt the 10th cohort and spare the captive created two factions, those who revered his saving of the men and those led by Tribune Severus, who saw it as a catastrophic breach of military discipline and a surrender to a barbarian. Severus, outraged and convinced Aelius was being manipulated, initiated the next unavoidable phase. He drafted a detailed, confidential report outlining the original deceptive plan, the unexpected halting of the troops, and Aelius's sudden, highly irregular protection of Livia. He sent the dispatch via the fastest messenger to the proconsul in Tarraco, effectively filing an official complaint of incompetence and moral failure against his general. The political ruin of Aelius was now in motion. Aelius received the news of Severus's betrayal with the same chilling calm he displayed on the battlefield. He had anticipated the move. He knew that saving the men would cost him his career. He called Severus into his tent, not with fury but with a quiet, terrible finality. "You have chosen loyalty to the rigid lex militaris over the lives of the soldiers, Severus," Aelius stated, signing a document. "I understand your decision, but the moment you chose tradition over humanity, you ceased to understand the true purpose of Rome's power, stability, not senseless slaughter." The signed document was Severus's immediate transfer to a penal garrison on the furthest edge of Mauritania. Aelius did not imprison the tribune, but banished him to professional irrelevance, a fate far worse for a career officer. Severus left the camp hours later, a defeated, bitter man, carrying the knowledge that he had done his duty, only to be judged by his commander for lacking a moral compass. Livia, meanwhile, paid her own price. Her status as a protected interpreter was a gilded cage. She was guarded constantly, isolated, and reviled by many of the soldiers who viewed her as the walking justification for the general's downfall. Worse, the knowledge of her warning, that she prioritized the safety of innocents over the strength of the rebellion, inevitably reached Bricius. A few days after the transfer of Severus, a small, crudely carved wooden bird was found pinned to the gate of the fort, smeared with mud. Livia saw it and her breath caught. It was Calen's bird. It was not a message of love. It was a clear warning of rejection. Bricius knew of her intervention. She was no longer considered the chieftain's daughter, no longer one of the Galicians. In trying to protect her brother, Livia had sacrificed her family, her identity, and her place among her people. She had earned the temporary safety of Calen, but she had lost everything else, becoming a citizen of neither Rome nor the mountain clans. The price of truth was separation, profound and absolute. Weeks later, the proconsul's official response arrived. General Aelius was recalled to Rome immediately to face charges of misconduct and tactical sabotage. He received the order in the same praetorium tent, stripping off his general's insignia for the last time. He was not ashamed. The men of the 10th cohort lived, and that was his final victory. Before his departure, Aelius sought out Livia, who was tending the meager vegetable patch outside the barracks. The general was now simply Marcus Aelius, a citizen facing trial, wearing the plain tunic of a traveler. He carried no sword, only a small leather satchel. "I leave for Rome at midday," he informed her, his voice low. "Your status remains protected until the conclusion of my trial. You will be held under the custody of the camp physician who owes me a debt." Livia stopped her work, clutching a handful of soil. "You are stripped of your command because of my warning, General. I owe you my life twice now, and my brother's safety." Aelius stepped closer, stopping at the edge of the patch. He looked at her, truly seeing the woman beneath the servant's grime. "You owe me nothing, Livia. You showed me the cost of absolute devotion to a dead law. I lost my son, Lucius, because I valued order above mercy. You saved 900 lives and forced me to choose humanity over the empire. That is the greatest service you could render Rome and to me." He pulled a small, rough bronze coin from his pouch, a low denomination insignificant. "This is a token of safe passage. When I am gone, use it to buy passage from this province. Go west, perhaps to the coast. You are not a rebel, nor a slave. You are free of both. Find your brother, Livia. Do not look for war, look for peace." Livia took the coin. It was cool and heavy in her palm. It wasn't money. It was a promise of a future she had fought for through sacrifice. As Aelius turned to leave, she noticed he was wearing a simple, dark traveling cloak. Not the heavy scarlet paludamentum of a commander, but a plain, humble garment. The man who expected execution had given her his cloak. The man who gave her freedom was now walking toward his own judgment. "What will happen to you in Rome, Marcus Aelius?" she asked, using his name for the first time. He paused at the edge of the path, looking back at the harsh, unforgiving Galician hills. "I will be judged by the empire I served, but I will face them as the father who finally understood honor, not the general who merely commanded it." He gave her a single sharp nod, a gesture of mutual respect forged in crisis. Then he walked away, leaving the Roman camp and the burden of command forever. Livia watched him go, the bronze coin warm in her hand, knowing the general's fall was her rise. Her destiny was no longer decided by a cross, but by the open, uncertain road ahead. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more emotional and epic tales like this one.